Well, thank you for that introduction, and thank you for this opportunity to talk about one of my favorite topics, the potential of emerging technologies to help support older adults in terms of social connectivity, in terms of well-being, in terms of independence. So there's a lot that technology can do for older adults. If we think about older adults in the design process of technology, that's the one take-home message I'm going to give you to begin with. And in terms of an overview, first I'd like to talk a little bit about issues of aging and technology design, essentially talking about the state of the digital divide, the differences between older people and younger people in their use and adoption of technology. I'd then like to talk briefly about two centers, the Create Center and the Enhance Center, both of which have missions to help understand what is the possibility of technology to make older adults' lives better, both older adults with and without cognitive impairment. And then I'll end by talking about a sampling of research looking at how technology might be able to support social connectivity and cognitive engagement. And after that, I hope we can have a really good conversation about different issues and how technology might be able to help support older adults. So just to give you a little bit of background, many of you may be aware of population aging, that in the United States and around the world, countries are getting older, that we're going to see more older adults in the United States and around the world than we've ever seen before. For example, between 2019 and 2060, we can expect an increase of about 40 million older people, defined as 65 years of age or older in the United States. And one of the fastest growing segments of the US population is the 85+ cohort. And this is really, really good news in a lot of ways. People are living into the older age, and that's a success story. People are living longer, healthier lives. But there also are other things to consider, that as people age, we see a variety of different changes in terms of cognitive ability, in terms of mobility, in terms of things like functional ability. That as we age, there are a number of declines that unfortunately interfere with older adults' ability to live independently, to do the things that they want to do, to be productive and engaged in their community. So we're seeing these two different trends, that there are going to be more older people in the world, but also there are going to be more older people who are experiencing some declines that require some degree of support. So those are interesting intersecting trends, and that's where I think technology holds massive potential in terms of meeting the needs of older adults and being able to provide them with meaningful social engagement, being able to help them live independently, being able to help them live more healthily. So there's a lot that technology can do for older people. And what are the ways that we can think about how technology can help people live more successfully as they age? I like this framework that my colleague Neil Charnas came up with, the PROS framework, that outlines all the different ways in which technology could potentially help older people. And this is a systematic hierarchical way to think about the role of technology in people's lives as they age. And one way is technology can help stop bad things from happening. So that's the P, that's the prevent, that we might think of a technology, for example, an exergame. And an older adult might engage in this exergame, and that might improve their cardiovascular fitness, which could prevent a bad outcome such as a heart attack or a stroke. So technology can prevent bad outcomes. But unfortunately, we can't prevent all bad outcomes in the world. When bad things happen, sometimes we can't prevent them, but we might be able to use technology to rehabilitate. So for example, someone does experience a stroke, technology, maybe a virtual reality program, might be able to help someone engage in meaningful exercises that could improve cognition, improve motor ability, and get them back to where they were. Unfortunately, then, rehabilitation is always not on the table. Then technology might be able to augment for the abilities that people still have. So if we can't rehabilitate people, we can augment the abilities that they have through technology. An older adult, for example, could be experiencing some memory problems. And technology can then come in and provide some memory aid, some kind of reminder system to help people use the cognition they have, and supplement that cognition, augment that cognition to allow them to remember what they need to remember. And finally, the last step is substitute. If an older adult is experiencing declines and they can no longer do something, you might think about an older adult, for example, who may have mobility challenges and can no longer engage in house cleaning. We might be able to substitute that house cleaning. We could buy a robotic vacuum, for example. A robotic vacuum could then substitute for the abilities that they can't do. So in general, there are a lot of great things that technology can do to help people live longer, successfully, to live kind of independently and engage in meaningful activities that are important to them. So that's the good news. The bad news is that we see still a very persistent digital divide, an age-related digital divide, where older adults adopt and use technology at a lower rate compared to younger adults across a variety of different types of technology. So what I'm presenting here on the left, what you can see is the percentage of each age cohort that uses the internet. And you can see this over the last 20 years. These are data from Pew. And essentially, this shows a still persistent digital divide. The purple line is the 65+ cohort. And you can see that that increases over time. But still today, about 25% of older people aren't online. They don't use the internet. And that is a potential resource that could help people find information and track their health and do lots of great things, but about 25% of older people still aren't online compared to near universal adoption of the internet by other age groups. On the right, what you see is smartphone ownership. So you see kind of the blue is kind of cell phone ownership. The red is smartphone ownership, and I guess the green would be dumb phone ownership. It's the kind of non-smartphone cell phone ownership. And what you see basically is for these different age groups, about 40% of older people don't own a smartphone. Again, that's compared to almost universal ownership by younger people. And again, there are a lot of apps out there that could help older adults track their health and help with a variety of different challenges. But those apps won't help people who don't own a smartphone. So for a variety of different technologies, we see this persistent age-related digital divide. And there are big consequences to this digital divide. During the pandemic, for example, so much of what we did, you had to do online. To show your vaccine status, you might have had an app on your phone. To be able to book a vaccine appointment, you might have had to go online. So much depends on being able to use technology tools today that older adults on the wrong side of the digital divide are substantially disadvantaged. So here's a nice article a couple of years ago from the New York Times. The title is, "Older People Need Rides. Why Aren't They Using Uber and Lyft?" So there are mobility challenges as we age. Many people will reach that point where they don't feel comfortable driving anymore, and there are technology-based solutions, but many older adults are not using those technology-based solutions. And as we saw from the previous slide, part of that's because 40% of older adults don't own a smartphone. It's very challenging to use these types of services if you don't have a smartphone. Other challenges we find in our laboratory, in our research, tends to be proficiency. When we look at older adults' proficiency using a smartphone and a tablet, there's huge variability. There are many older adults who are great at using these technologies, but the spread is very, very wide, where they're, on average, older adults are less proficient using many technologies compared to younger adults, and that's just a difference that you can see in a lot of the data sets that we're dealing with. So proficiency, there are perceptual and cognitive changes that make using technology more difficult, especially kind of small devices. There are attitudinal differences as well, where older adults tend not to value different technologies on average as much as younger adults. There are issues of access and ownership. And a big part of this is technology design, I believe, because a lot of technology is designed by 20-year-olds for 20-year-olds. They're not thinking about how their technology might be useful to older people, and they're not thinking about how technology, they might make it to be more usable by older people. So a lot of this comes down to technology that is not designed considering the needs and abilities and preferences of older people. So that's something that we're trying to fix. We're trying to release guidelines. We come up with guidelines for how to design better so that everybody can get the same advantage from technology. So unfortunately, it may be getting worse in the near future. What we're seeing is rapid technological advancement, so that the technological landscape is changing, making it, even for younger people, hard to keep up. And older adults tend to be more disadvantaged in terms of learning rate, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But there's a rapid change in the capabilities of technology. Technology is getting smaller, technology is getting faster, and emerging technologies are coming out all the time and then come to rapidly dominate the technological landscape, which is hard for many people to keep up with, but especially for older people. And not only are the technologies rapidly evolving, they are also diffusing more readily and more rapidly in the United States. This graph shows the amount of time in years it takes for each of these technologies to reach 50% of US homes. And what you can see is that earlier technologies like the telephone, it took about 70 years for the telephone in the United States to reach half of the homes of the United States, a very long time. But as you kind of get to more and more modern technologies, these things can rapidly come to dominate the technological landscape. We think about, for example, we're talking about ChatGPT, which is an AI-based model that does all these great things. It became available in November of 2022, and right now I'm convinced most of my students are using it to answer their homework, that new technologies come out and they rapidly kind of dominate. And unfortunately, there are costs of new learning that are different for older people compared to younger people. These are just some data showing how long it takes people, younger and older people, to learn a new piece of technology. And what you see is you see that novice bar, and that is kind of the bar of people who have never used that technology or similar technologies before. The black is people who have used that technology before. And then you see younger, middle, and older people. And what you see is that it takes older people much longer to learn new technologies, especially technologies that are radically different from technologies they've used in the past. And unfortunately, those are the technologies that keep on coming out. You think about an autonomous vehicle, for example. That is a radically new technology that fundamentally changes the nature of the driving task. So older adults are differentially hurt by having to learn new technologies. It provides a disincentive or an increased cost for learning new technologies that unfortunately suppresses adoption of new technologies and suppresses kind of the desire to engage in these new technologies. So this is kind of the basic of what we're thinking about, of what causes or what's responsible for the age-related digital divide. And what we're trying to do in our research is trying to overcome and understand those barriers. Because if we can overcome their barriers, there are a lot of exciting possibilities for how technology can help support older adults. Many people, for example, are interested in robotics and how robots might be able to provide services or social companionship for older people who may be at risk for social isolation. There's a lot going on in the robotic space of technology to help support older adults remain independent and also socially engaged. There are a lot of exciting things happening in terms of the space of virtual reality and augmented reality to provide social connectivity and cognitive engagement and enjoyment and leisure activities and lots of great things. And even physical fitness, exergaming as well. And there are huge, rapid advancements in terms of artificial intelligence that could potentially benefit older people. These could be technologies, for example, that could help older people make decisions about their health, help them make decisions about very complicated health and financial decisions. But what we need to do is understand what are the limitations of these technologies and how to design these technologies so that they're useful and usable and safe for people to use. So in the technology space, things are rapidly changing. There are a lot of benefits these technologies could provide to older adults, but the one thing we need to think about is a user-centered design process. A user-centered design process helps ensure that new technologies that we're developing are going to be useful and usable to older people. It has to happen early in the development of a new technology. It needs to be iterative, and it has to start with a needs assessment process to try to understand what are the challenges that older people, both with and without cognitive impairment, experience, so you design technology that meets those needs. I think where a lot of technology fails is that a lot of app developers are designing for imaginary problems because they've never actually talked to an older adult. They've never actually talked to someone with mild cognitive impairment. They've never actually talked to someone with cognitive challenges. And because of that, they're designing for what they think an older adult's problem is, but not what those real problems are. So it needs to be needs assessment, there needs to be pilot testing of prototypes, there needs to be redesign, re-pilot testing, kind of review, and finally, at some point, once you've ensured the usability of the technology, you have to look at efficacy. Does it actually do the thing you want it to do? So this is a complicated process. It's a long process, but it's what we really need to do when we're developing technology interventions to help older people. And this is what we do partly in our CREATE Center, the Center for Research and Education on Aging and Technology Enhancement, which is a multidisciplinary center that has psychologists, it has computer scientists, it has clinicians, it has lots of people who are knowledgeable about lots of little pieces of the puzzle to understand how technology might be able to help support older adults. And it's also a multi-site center that allows us to recruit participants with diversity. So CREATE is a long-running center funded by the National Institute of Health, specifically National Institute on Aging, and it was founded in 1999. We just past June received our 5th round of funding, so this has been a long-standing center with the aim of trying to understand how everyone can benefit from existing and emerging technologies, and specifically how to ensure that the benefits of technology can be realized by older people to support their social connectivity, to support their health, to support their community engagement, to support lots of things, quality of life, so that everyone gets the benefit of existing and emerging technologies, because we know that that's not the case today, that there's a digital divide, an age-related digital divide, and some people are locked out of the benefits of technology. Specifically, this round of CREATE, we're doing a lot in terms of exploring ways that technology systems can learn about the user. So typically you teach a piece of technology to someone and they have to learn the ins and outs of that technology. But what if that technology could learn a little bit about you and learn about what you're trying to do and what you want and what your habits are, and then be adaptive towards trying to figure out what is it you're trying to accomplish, and then helping and guiding you and giving you breadcrumbs along the way to do the things that would be meaningful to you with that piece of technology. So we're looking at supportive technology to enhance cognitive health and social health and community engagement. We're looking at ways that we might be able to help older people make very complicated health and financial decisions that affect their lives. So within the CREATE Center, we have a lot of aims using VR, using tablets, using wearables, using lots of different technologies to help support older people. And this is our model, our conceptual model of how do we do this? And as you can see, the older adult is at the center of the model. It recognizes that older adults are different on average than younger adults. And there are certain perceptual and cognitive psychomotor differences. There are differences in terms of preference. There are differences in terms of kind of needs, and basically we're trying to design that technology so that the demands of using that technology don't exceed the capabilities of the user. So it's a classic person environment fit model where we try to understand what are the constraints that we have to deal with, how are older adults and younger adults systematically different, and then making sure our technology solutions don't exceed the capabilities or the abilities of older adults and even older adults with cognitive impairment. So that's our classic model. We have kind of a sibling center to CREATE called the ENHANCE Center. ENHANCE stands for Enhancing Neurocognitive Health Abilities, Networks, and Community Engagement. We love our acronyms, so there's CREATE and ENHANCE. And this is a separate center looking at how technology might be used specifically to assist older adults with cognitive impairment. So we want to, within the ENHANCE Center, and again, this is a multidisciplinary center with lots of individuals involved and multi-site center. One is we want to understand, for older adults living with cognitive impairments, what are the basic daily needs? What do they need support with? So we have large studies looking at needs assessment and longitudinal needs assessment as well, because we know some of these conditions change with time. Someone, for example, who is an older adult who experiences cognitive impairment as a result of traumatic brain injury, they may get better over time. Someone with mild cognitive impairment, which is also often considered almost a precursor to dementia, they may get worse over time, or they may stay the same. So that's a very challenging question of how do you design technology when the abilities of the individual will be changing over time. We want to identify technology solutions for those needs and then advance new knowledge in the aging and cognitive disability space so that we can help develop guidelines for how to design not just for older adults, but for older adults with cognitive impairment. And the three populations we're dealing with here are older adults with mild cognitive impairment, which is not quite dementia, but also not normative, normal kind of aging. So it's this transitionary state between normal aging and dementia, and about 18% of those 60 or older are experiencing mild cognitive impairment. We also are trying to design for older adults who experience traumatic brain injury and cognitive impacts of traumatic brain injury, which often results as a result of a fall, and also trying to understand how to design for people experiencing cognitive impairment as a result of a stroke. So those are the two big centers that we are trying to develop technology solutions that are going to be useful and usable for older adults. And I want to go through some case examples of the research that we've conducted to look at these types of issues. So I'm going to start with a case example of the PRISM clinical trial. PRISM stands for Personal Reminder Information and Social Management System. It's a computer system that we developed specifically for older adults at risk for social isolation. So our target population is older adults who live alone, they don't work, they don't volunteer, they don't go to the community center, and we had strict criteria for making sure these are individuals who are at risk for social isolation, and we think that technology can actually serve a really important role, and this was actually pre-COVID, but we believe that technology can serve an important role in helping connect people in meaningful ways. And the first pass at this was the PRISM system, where it had email, it had internet, it had classroom activities, it had information about what's going on in your community. If there are things going on in your community that are interesting to you, here they are. So here it was a software system we developed, and we targeted older adults at risk for social isolation. And it's important to recognize that social isolation and loneliness are really devastating for health. When you look at the consequences, there are increased mortality, morbidity. People are sicker, more depressed when they're socially isolated and lonely, and we want to be able to address that. So this was a year-long clinical trial where we tested this. We put this in people's homes, and we looked at what was the impact of this. So in terms of our aims, we wanted to see what is the impact of technology. And we all have an intuitive sense that technology is good and technology can help people. But we want to provide the evidence that well-designed technology can help people in meaningful and important ways. So we examined the impact of the PRISM system in people's homes on social isolation, well-being, and those types of measures, and also how that might change their attitudes towards technology. So if we're able to design an easy-to-use technology for older people, provide the right instructional support, does that fundamentally change their attitudes towards technology, which then could lead to the adoption of other technologies? So in the PRISM randomized control trial, we had 300 people assigned to either the PRISM condition where they received the computer or a binder control condition where they received a lot of information, but it wasn't interactive, it wasn't social. But the important thing to realize here is that that's not where we started. Where we started was, we started with surveys, we started with focus groups. We asked older people who use computers, what's valuable to you about computer use? We asked older people who didn't use computers, why aren't you using computers, and what would be the barriers that you're experiencing that we could help design around? So it started with surveys and focus groups. As human factors experts, people with expertise in design, we did classic kind of heuristic analysis of every single screen, does this conform to good human factors guidelines or not? If not, we revised it. We went back to the drawing board. Then we did usability studies after developing a prototype, and then we redid the prototype, we redesigned the system, and finally, at that point, we get to the efficacy trial. So we have ensured that it's usable. Now, is it going to be useful to older people? And we had a pretty diverse sample. This may be too small to see, but we had about 40% of our sample had high school education or less. About 33% was kind of African American, and about 87% was low income. So this is a diverse group of older people that we can see, is this technology useful for people who are at risk for social isolation? And then we had a binder control group. So 150 people received the computer system in their home for a year. 150 people received the binder. And the binder was dynamic. We would send them new materials every month to put in their binder to make it somewhat more engaging. And we control for the number of contacts that we had with participants. And just in terms of outcomes, we saw, first of all, everyone was able to use the system. Our oldest participant was 98 years old. I should also mention none of these participants had used computers before. So we were able to train and get everyone to use computers. people improved in the PRISM condition more in terms of social support, reduced loneliness, greater reductions in loneliness, and greater increases in well-being, and huge differences in terms of attitudes towards computers, proficiency with technology, and also we saw continued use of the system throughout the entire year-long period. So the way we measured use is, did they use the system at all any day of the week? And what we found is that over the entire course of the year-long period, people use the system about 4 out of 7 days every week on average throughout the entire course of the study. So in that way, I think it was a success. People loved it. We showed kind of changes in kind of outcome measures that you would expect. But I don't think the numbers often tell the stories of some of our participants. And this is one of the participants' stories who said they felt very fortunate being part of the program. They're lonely and alone, and they appreciate the computer. It's brought them lots of emails. They love the emails. They can't get out, so they love the emails. And when I want some information, I go on Google and Yahoo. When I'm able to sit longer, I play the games, so I keep my mind going. I think it's very helpful. When I was without it for a few days, I really, really miss it. I really did. So it shows that there are really big changes in terms of people's what people are able to do. And again, this was an older woman who was socially isolated, not a computer user before, but when the system's well designed and easy to use, people get a lot of benefit from it. And that was our first crack at this. Right now, we are seeing lots of other emerging technologies that might be very, very useful for older adults who might be at risk for social isolation. So the pace of technology is rapidly changing. There's lots of new potential to help support older people, but also potentially new barriers as new technologies are introduced that we just don't know about. So what we need to do is a user-centered design process. We need to look at usability. We need to look at how difficult the technology is to use, how we might design the technology better, and also what's going to be the impact of that technology. So we've quickly moved into the area of virtual reality and augmented reality to potentially provide social and cognitive support for older people with and without cognitive impairment. And I'll talk about some preliminary investigations, some small-scale investigations that we've done over the last couple of years that are leading up to a fairly large randomized controlled trial that will be extended, it will be at home, to look at what is the impact of these technologies on people's well-being, their social connectivity, and their quality of life. So VR holds a lot of potential, I think, for supporting older adults in terms of cognitive engagement and social interactions. But first, we have to understand what are the potential barriers to the use of these systems. So we did a simple usability study where we had 20 younger adults and 20 older adults, and we had them engage in a variety of virtual reality experiences. And the potential barriers could be usability. Maybe the systems are just not designed well for people who are older. Maybe the controllers are not designed well. Maybe the scenarios, the VR programs are not designed well. So that would be one barrier. Cyber sickness or simulator sickness is another potential barrier. A lot of people, if they're very sensitive to these kind of cyber sickness or simulator sickness, when they get into virtual reality environments, virtual environments, they throw up, they get sick, they get nauseous. There are a lot of bad, I see Nick is kind of pointing to himself. And we need to know, is that a barrier to people's enjoyment and kind of benefit from these systems? And the third variable that we looked at is an important variable in the virtual reality literature called presence. And presence simply means, do you feel like you're really there? Do you feel like you're really in the virtual environment, or do you feel like you're in a laboratory space with a headset on and in an artificial kind of environment? And so many studies find that the success of a virtual reality intervention, be it a clinical intervention or any other type of intervention, depends on the degree of presence that the person feels like they're really there. And presence is a complicated construct. It requires cognitive ability. It requires processing spatial relationships. It requires attention to pay attention to the sound and the sight of the virtual environment and block out what's going on in the real world. There are cognitive abilities that are spatial and attentional and involve working memory that may decline with age, that might interfere with older adults' ability to form presence. So we looked at all of these different factors, and we had older adults and younger adults engage in a variety of different virtual reality simulations. We had them go through a virtual tour of a virtual home. We had them do a virtual sightseeing kind of program at Vesper Peak. They did a little bit of meditation. Just for fun, we threw in a very complicated, fast-paced action video game, just to kind of get the whole space of what might be available out there. And what we actually found is a couple of surprising results. One is that older adults often experience greater presence in the virtual environment compared to younger adults, which is good news. If that's the active ingredient, older adults are actually experiencing greater presence. And we recently replicated this in a separate study by another CREATE group and found that that was a robust result. We found very few differences in terms of usability. If you look at that bottom graph, that's effort on a scale of 1 to 7, and the older adults are in the black, the younger adults are in the gray. And basically, you can see that the different experiences had different levels of effort. The action video game was rated by everyone as being more effortful, but there were no differences in terms of age. And we actually found, surprisingly, significantly less simulator sickness or cyber sickness for older adults compared to younger adults. And we were very surprised by this. When we started digging into the literature, we actually find that presence is a protective factor against simulator sickness, that if you actually feel like you're really in there, you don't get this mismatch between kind of the real world and the virtual world that tends to be responsible for simulator sickness. So that was our first pass at this. Then we decided to look at older adults with and without cognitive impairment. And again, a small pilot study. Are we able to get people to use these systems? Are they easy to use? Do they have good experiences? We looked at older adults both with and without probable mild cognitive impairment, 10 with self-reported physical disability, we had them engage in a variety of different virtual reality, nature-based scenes. We looked at usability, we looked at the feasibility of this intervention, but we also looked at what is the initial efficacy? Does it change people's mood before and after exposure? Does it change their attitudes about virtual reality? And after we had them go through a series of tutorials in the upper left, we had them plant a virtual garden. And engage in gardening activities, and you could plant the flowers, and the flowers would grow, and it would be some degree of productive engagement that people are building things, and hopefully building things that could be meaningful to them. And then after that, we had them do these 360-degree footage videos of nature and outdoor scenes. And we looked at what is the initial impact, are there usability challenges, because if there are big challenges, we need to know that now before we move to a randomized controlled trial where we enroll hundreds of people. And I'll just show kind of briefly a video.
So I guess I should, right? We've got daffodils. We've got to have daffodils in the garden. Oh, we got a whole bunch of them. All right, and we're going to take them over. I assume this is where they should go. Yep. I don't want to step too close to the garden, but there we go. Now I gotta watch my step and go back, and let's get these guys. Okay. And there we go. Ah, there are my daffodils. Okay, lost track of those guys. Why I like to plant daffodils, right? Come on, give me a guess, guys. Nobody's gonna guess. Oh, we're going out the door. All right, now, yeah. All right. Put them there. Go ahead. Okay.
So that gives you an idea of the experiences that people went through. It's a fairly complex design. I would just focus on part of the design where we looked at people's attitudes before and after exposure to virtual reality. about what were their feelings and kind of perceptions of virtual reality. And then we also looked at their mood. We used something called the multidimensional mood scale that kind of has people rate their mood from anxious to calm, from good to bad. And we looked at just, is there preliminary evidence that this helps people in terms of basic mood? And what we found pretty consistently is that I always plot things as up being better, so that's kind of what you'll see here. On this good-bad scale, people improved and felt better after the intervention, a very short intervention of just a few virtual reality exposure or kind of experiences. They felt more calm, and their attitudes towards virtual reality improved after exposure. So very good news in terms of at least some initial efficacy that the virtual reality made people feel better and improved their attitudes towards virtual reality. And I think that's key, that when you give people success with technology, they feel better about that technology. When you give people good experiences, they feel better about those experiences. Cyber sickness was very low, again, very similar. If you kind of look at the average, about 2.7, there are like 16 different questions for cyber sickness. And if you experience symptoms on any one of those, you go from 0 to be none, 1 to be slight symptoms, moderate would be 2 points. 2.7 out of all those 16 questions, it suggests that people really experience at most slight sickness, but most people experience no sickness at all, very consistent with our previous studies, and cyber sickness or simulator sickness didn't vary as a function of cognitive impairment or disability status. So there's a lot of good news. Again, what about some initial evidence that VR can be used as a social aid, that it can help connect people who might be distally located? Could we co-locate them into the same virtual space and have meaningful conversations and have them actually like that person as well, even if that person might be a stranger? So what we did was, in this experiment, we had collaborators at Weill Cornell, we had collaborators at Cornell Ithaca, we had collaborators at Florida State University, and basically we took older adults at different locations and then co-located them within the same virtual space to see what is the nature of the social interactions they had. Would that be a positive experience? Would there again be usability challenges or simulator sickness challenges? So we're connecting older adults through, even though they're very, very far distally located, into the same virtual space to see what that experience is like. And we had, again, a very kind of preliminary study, 36 dyads, 18 pairs of people, or sorry, 36 participants and 18 pairs of people. And what we had people do is we had them get together within virtual environments. They saw a map of the world. And what they had to do was pick a place they wanted to visit. And they would say, okay, and they'd have to negotiate that. They would have to say, okay, let's go to Paris, or let's go to Italy. And then they would go take that tour. And at that point, they would take the tour together. They then would take a hot air balloon ride together. And then they would actually get a blank museum they would walk into, and they would see pictures of their experience, and then they'd hang those pictures on the wall to create a virtual museum of what they were experienced. So there's no sound with this one, but just kind of give you a sense of how people kind of interacted. So they started I believe this was Italy that they were in this case. They took a hot air balloon ride together, and then they at some point go into the, museum and put the museum together. I don't know why that's not working. You'll have to trust me, they get to the museum, but they put the pictures on the wall, and at that point, the experience is done. And again, we had a lot of measures before and after the VR experience. Again, you don't have to kind of extract much from this, but just know that they went through those various modules. We looked at mood before and after. We looked at usability. And also, did they like that person that they were with? Did they want to reconnect with that person? In terms of mood, we were able to show that for older adults, after this experience, they shifted more significantly towards calm rather than nervous. Other outcome measures include, I'm just showing histograms, but basically on a scale of 1 to 5 in terms of, was that engaging? Did you like that experience? Did you find that fun? On average, 4.2 out of 5. We looked at usability. We had people rate the usability of the experience in the system on a scale of 1 to 7, and about 2.8. So you can see very few people kind of went up to kind of the extremes of finding it very kind of unusable or the workload to be very, very high. When we asked them on a 1 to 5 scale, would you like to meet this person? This was a total stranger, but a 3.7 is not bad in terms of on a scale of 1 to 5. 5 would be, I really, really want to meet this person. 1, I never want to see this person again. There was some interest in seeing that person. The one real, I mean, it's not a real piece of data, but it's anecdote. One participant at Florida State University liked one of the participants so much at Cornell Ithaca, they exchanged email addresses within the virtual environment so they could keep in touch afterwards. So there are kind of a variety of experiences, but some people did feel like this was a meaningful and social engagement, which leads us next to a large randomized controlled trial in which we're having 216 older people at the different sites of the CREATE Center who will be randomly assigned to a VR program to provide social and cognitive engagement, or randomly assigned to a tablet condition with a lot of the same activities, but not immersive, not virtual. And we're going to look at what is the feasibility, acceptability, and initial efficacy of this on a variety of psychosocial outcomes after about 6 months. And also we're looking at safety. One thing that we're thinking about for home-based interventions with VR, you have no vision, and you might have older adults who tend to have more adverse consequences to falls. You want to make sure that that's going to be a safe and fun experience. So that's where we're all heading. So just kind of a summary and wrapping up. We believe that technology has a lot of massive potential to help older people engage in, both with and without cognitive impairment, meaningful activities. It can connect them to their community, it can connect them to their family, it can improve well-being. But we have to go through a very rigorous systematic process to understand how do we make that system usable and how do we make it useful to older adults. Both of these centers, the CREATE and the Enhanced Center, are trying to develop novel technology solutions, and often from the ground up. And we think that emerging technologies are promising solutions to help with successful aging, providing a variety of different types of support that could be cognitive and social. I think this all highlights the potential of technology. Again, but reiterating this point, we have to be very, very careful. We have to, first of all, do the usability studies to make sure it's usable, and then after that, do the efficacy studies to make sure it is useful. I'll conclude with some final thoughts that might kind of engage discussion. One question we also often get is, will the digital divide persist? Will, for example, tech-savvy younger adults today struggle with new technologies in the future? I think that's a fundamental and interesting and important question to think about. What is the nature of the digital divide and what causes it? I would say, my opinion is, I'm 43 years old. In 40 years, if I'm lucky enough to be kind of 83, I have no idea what a computer is going to look like. It certainly isn't going to look like this, and there may be challenges for the kind of future generations that may be very, very similar to the technological kind of challenges, and we might see a digital divide in the future. Because age-related changes in perception and cognition will likely persist, which will alter our ability to interact with technology. There's going to be a greater cost of new learning, which is likely to persist. I know CVL is trying to fix all these problems, but in the immediate future, there are kind of issues that likely mean that technology will still be a challenge for tech-savvy younger adults in the future. Although this is up for debate, technology will continue to evolve and diffuse rapidly. So unless we're careful, I think there's a challenge and also a potential, because of rapid technological advances, unless if we kind of act quickly and use a very usable, kind of a user-centered design process, unless we're careful, there's a possibility for the digital divide to even be exacerbated rather than solved when we think about all of these trends in concert, which focuses and really kind of highlights the need for placing the older adult at the center of the user design process in all we do. So I'd like to thank you for your attention and also thank the funding organizations. National Institute on Aging supports the CREATE Center, and NIDLR, the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, supports the Enhanced Center. Thank you.
Where should I go? Thanks so much, Wally. We have time for questions. who would like to start us off? Yes, please.
Thoughts on how you're going to get this into the hands of people? What's your route?
There's a microphone coming to you.
Do you have any thoughts on how you're going to get this technology into the hands of people, and what's your route to market?
Yeah, I mean, that's a very valid and good point. We are kind of, in a lot of ways, not very well equipped to do that. As a kind of an academic research center, we depend a lot on, for the latest round of Create 5, an industry advisory board that will help us to shape some of these things. And I think that's a persistent challenge in academic research looking at technology, is that we just don't have the tools. We're not used to. We have kind of, the science is kind of our full-time job, and it's very challenging for people. But we have, through NIDLR, for example, been required to come up with a plan, a technology transfer plan, to come up with some route to help get this into people's hands. We're not hoping to make money off any of these technologies. One way, I mean, we just want to make sure that if these are solutions that are viable, it will get to the companies that will be able to get this into people's hands. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but it has always been a challenge, I think, for a lot of academics to take this next step and get it to the next level.
Hi. When I think about the older adult at the center of the user design, I also think about the relationship between usability and security. So things like two-factor authentication, strong passwords, and session timeouts. What is being done to address what might be less usable and less secure for the older population?
That's a really good question. I think that that's something that rises, and I don't know if there's really good solutions right now because, yeah, I mean, two-factor authentication is really important. But if you're one of the 40% of older people who don't have a smartphone, it can't push it to you so you can authenticate. There are really big challenges there. And I think there's always going to be a balance between making things more secure and then making things more accessible. It's hard to kind of resolve that tension, but I think that's an important research question that we still haven't really solved quite yet. But part of what we do in all of our research is we recognize that we're putting older adults who have not used certain technologies out there into kind of the wild west of virtual reality or the internet, and trying to provide at least the education and the tools and the training to know what's safe and what's not safe to do. But I agree that that's a very important kind of balance. I don't know if we have a good solution just yet, but it's a good question.
Yeah, there's a question here.
Great work. I've two questions. First one is in your PRISM, I think, yeah, PRISM study. It looks to me that your research subject female to male ratio is 3:1, even at the 60 range group, and if I get it correctly. So maybe you can explain that a little bit. And the second question is, for that gentleman also mentioned a little bit about security. In the internet world, especially for older people, there's a lot of misinformation and scam, especially financial scam. So have you guys looked at how to incorporate that into your tools?
Yeah, I think both of those are really good questions. I mean, the bias for female participants, it's common in almost all aging research, unfortunately, where, well, one thing that contributes to that is just men die earlier. So there are more older women compared to older men, and that's part of it. But also there are standard volunteer biases that are hard to come, where just women tend to volunteer more than men. We try as much as possible to kind of overcome those biases, but in the PRISM study, as you could see, that there is kind of a mismatch there. We have a large enough sample with 300 people, and the latest PRISM 2.0 has about 300 people as well, the next randomized control trial. We can do kind of subgroup analyses and still be decently powered to look at, are there kind of gender differences? But unfortunately, that tends to be pretty common in most aging research. The second part in terms of security for the PRISM study and the follow-up PRISM study, PRISM 2.0, which was a tablet-based computer rather than a PC, we provided extensive training on how to avoid scams. That's part of the process before we kind of give people new technology. We always try to one, if it's possible, keep people from program into the system itself, keep people from doing dangerous things. But two, also provide them with the education and knowledge. But those are, yeah, I mean, as we kind of talk about maybe older adults with MCI and older adults from MCI dementia, it's going to be more and more important to kind of build that more into the system itself rather than kind of rely on the educational training. Those are issues that we're very sensitive to. With the latest round of Create 5, we have a data, technical, and development core that now has a cybersecurity subcomponent to it for all of our projects to evaluate, is there going to be any potential danger of people being defrauded or people's personal data being released and compromised. So those are our kind of designing into the system if we can, but training is always our first line of defense. Thank you.
Yeah, this is really interesting research. Thanks for sharing. My question, it seemed like it's so important. Are there other people doing similar things? I mean, it looks like just a few of you guys doing it, and I just wonder where else is it being done similar or duplicated or complementary?
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of people are, I'm thinking about people like Sheila Cotton, who is at Clemson right now, who does a lot of really good research looking at how technology impacts social connectivity and how social media might be able to assist older adults. There are people like Rick Schultz, who's at University of Pittsburgh, who's looking at how technology can support caregiving, and a lot of older people are care recipients, but also a lot of older people are caregivers as well, and what role can technology play there? So I think it's a pretty important topic, and a lot of people are in this space. Other people in terms of technology, I'm thinking about people like Jeff Kay, who do technology-based systems within the home that monitor people to try to understand and predict future cognitive problems, future health problems, using technology as ways to diagnose. So there are a lot of people. Yeah, I think I'm very grateful that there are a lot of people in this space because it's really critically important, I think, when we're thinking about population aging and the role that technology can serve to help people preserve their independence. There are a lot of people in this space, and that's a really good thing.
Seeing a question just out.
Hi, great talk. When I think about some problems that need to still be solved with older adults, I think of how they can get lost in areas that were once really familiar to them. So I was curious if you or if you know anyone that has used VR to study maintaining and preserving mental maps.
Yeah, I would. Our colleague at Cornell Ithaca, Saleh Kalantari, is using VR to try to understand people's mental representations and provide guidance. And you can think about VR and augmented reality as well as ways to help people navigate. We know, for example, people with MCI have even spatial navigation skills and wayfinding decrease with age, but people with mild cognitive impairment and dementia that kind of is an increased deficit. And you can imagine lots of augmented reality solutions, maybe a pair of glasses that you wear that has a superimposed kind of image of the routes that you need to take, giving you turn-by-turn directions. You think about virtual reality that maybe someone is navigating a unfamiliar scene or unfamiliar space. Could we provide them with practice before they even get to that? Maybe they're going to a new doctor's they've never been before. Let's do a run-through on VR so that when you kind of get there, you know where to go. So I think that that's a really important component of augmented and virtual reality is potentially training and providing support for wayfinding abilities. Yeah, we had a question up here.
I think we have a question here, yeah. Could we have a microphone at the front, please?
Thank you for your presentation, by the way, but have you looked at the Western Europe, in particular France? They do a lot of work with senior citizens, and they have a much more practical approach to treating seniors and providing services to seniors in France than in this country.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that there are certainly, I don't know those programs specifically, but I think there are certainly country differences, and there is certainly challenges, I think, in the United States in terms of infrastructure to provide the support that some people might need, older people might need. So I think there are other countries out there we could look at it as models that can help us understand that. And I think technology may hopefully help us to make the system more efficient, to help be able to distribute care in a way that is going to reach as many people as possible. But yeah, US may not be doing as much as they could to solve some of these problems.
So I'm going to bring the formal proceedings to a close, but Wally, I'm going to make the assumption that you're happy for people to come and talk to you outside. You are all cordially invited to the reception, which will be in the atrium outside, and also to look at the poster presentations which describe some of the work that's going on in our center. So please enjoy yourselves outside and take the opportunity to talk to Wally if you have any further questions. But before we go, can you please join me in thanking Wally once again?